All right. I guess people are coming in. I actually, whoops, can't see the chat. So let me see if I can get it back up while we have people come in. I think it just goes away when I'm sharing, so that's okay. We'll go back in the presentation mode. For people coming in, we'll get started shortly. We just want to make sure we give everybody some time to join. While you're coming in, we do have a poll that we'd love for you to answer to, yeah, help give us a little bit of an idea of who our audience is, especially, we can tailor this advice a little bit if we know who you are. So, yeah, I see the answers are starting to come in. Thank you. Wow, you guys are fast poll filler outers. There's a lot of answers now. Okay. Looks like so far we're pretty evenly balanced in terms of marketing knowledge. Some people with not a lot of knowledge and some people with a lot of knowledge. So hopefully we find a little bit of advice for everybody today. Let's see. I also see a variety of different marketing strategies. Looks like some of you are already doing a lot, some of you not so much. We'll come back to these answers once everybody's in, but so far pretty varied. But it looks like not a lot of people have a lot of budget, which that's unfortunately often the case in nonprofits, but we'll talk a little bit about what you can do with a small budget too. That's okay, or no budget at all. Don't worry, there's still things there for you to do too. Right, I think we should give everybody maybe one more minute and then we can go ahead and get started. All right. So I think we're gonna go ahead and dive in. Obviously, if people join as we go, there's no problem, but thank you for filling out the poll. Like I said, it's really helpful for us to kind of understand where you're at. So I don't know if you guys can see the answers or not, but I'll give my little diagnosis of this. It looks like we've got majority or the highest number of you have some intermediate marketing knowledge, so that's really great. But don't worry if you don't have any or if you're a beginner too. We're gonna, like I said, try to get a little bit of advice for everybody today and really brush up on what makes marketing with the nonprofits unique. As far as marketing strategies go, really, we have a wide variety. Some of you have a very comprehensive strategy and some of you are not using any marketing at all right now. So that's good. Again, we'll really try to hit on sort of these different knowledge levels. And then it looks like the results came in and unfortunately, not a lot of people have a lot of budget, but that's okay. Like I said, we're gonna try to look at some strategies that maybe require an investment of time, but not so much in terms of the monetary investment. So, all right, shall we go ahead and dive in? All right, then I'm gonna get rid of the poll here. And we can go ahead and get started. So as I hope you know, but if you don't, the topic for today is from awareness to advocacy, nonprofit marketing that makes an impact. So before I go ahead and dive in, just a few like housekeeping things. I have my colleague Oriana here helping me out. She's going to be keeping an eye on the chat, and there's also this Q&A function in Zoom. So if you have a question as I go along, please feel free to leave it in there. And if it's really, really relevant and I have a second to answer it, Oriana will let me know. Otherwise, we'll have a Q&A session at the end. But if you give us some feedback as we go, it helps us kind of keep an eye on if things are making sense to you or not. So please feel free to use those functions. It really helps. And then I haven't said who I am, so we'll go ahead and get into that. So a little tiny bit about me. I'm Sam. I am specialized in, as you can probably guess, marketing for nonprofits. And one thing that I think I hinted at when we talked about the poll, but that's really important to me, is this idea of how can we understand the very unique challenges that nonprofits have, especially when you're working with limited time or resources. I know that's often a challenge. So that's really one thing that we're always trying to help with. And then some of my experience includes in Google Grant Management, analytics, social media, SEO. If these things don't mean anything to you yet, that's okay. We're going to talk a little bit more about all of them. So don't worry. And just another note is that I have been in your shoes. I used to work in client services at a nonprofit in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I've, of course, volunteered at many a nonprofit. So I understand what it's like to be in your shoes. I know you often have to wear a lot of hats and are doing a lot of things. So I'm really glad that you could be here today to talk about marketing. Love marketing. So here we go. But before we get into the content, just to give you a little bit of context about where we're coming from and who we are, Elevation, we are a a digital marketing company focused on nonprofits. We were founded back in 2007, and we've been at it for over 15 years. We do have an international presence. Our headquarters are in Washington, D.C., but we also have offices in Florida and California, and also in Buenos Aires in Argentina. We do have this mission-driven team, which, what does that mean? That basically means kind of like what I told you about myself. Everybody at Elevation has some direct nonprofit experience. So we really do understand what it's like to be on that side of things and some of the unique challenges that you face. And then one thing that I really love about Elevation is that we've worked with nonprofits that do many, 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 many different things. I think it's so fascinating how there's so many different things that nonprofits do. You serve a lot of different communities. And so we've really been able to help with many, many different types of nonprofits. And I think we bring to the table in these kinds of discussions a unique view of how all these different kinds of nonprofits can put this marketing into action. And that's really what we're here to share with you today. So with that said, I do want to clarify that because our experience is in digital marketing, we're really going to be focusing on digital marketing today. I will make a few comments about sort of like more traditional marketing where it's relevant, especially when we're talking about marketing journeys, but the strategies that I'm going to speak to are mostly digital strategies. If you have questions about traditional marketing, you can always ask them and we'll do our best, but really our bread and butter is digital marketing, and hence why we're all on Zoom today, right? So, okay, enough with all this housekeeping introduction, let's get into it. So we're just gonna go through a couple different aspects of the basics of how to build this marketing strategy that really brings people down this funnel or through these steps of going from awareness to advocacy, as the title says, with this idea of trying to help you make your impact. So I won't spend a ton of time here, but just so you get an idea of where we're going, we're going to talk a little bit about what is marketing, some little misconceptions, and then also what makes it a little bit different for nonprofits. Then talking about the marketing funnel, which if you don't have experience with that, I think it's a really good way to sort of organize your strategies and get things straight. So I really want you to focus on that part. I think that's really helpful. Then we're going to talk about some marketing channels for nonprofits. So that was what I was starting to talk about earlier about social media and SEO and on all of these fancy terms. We're going to get into a little bit more depth with that. And then we're going to talk about some specific strategies that can help you boost your nonprofit marketing, share a success story. And then at the end, if I do good on my timing, then we'll be able to have a little bit of Q&A too. But like I said, if you have questions as we go, please feel free to just throw them in the chat or the Q&A and we'll try to get to them. So All right, take a little sip of water and we can get into it. So first off, here we are. What is marketing? Marketing specifically has to do with this process. I think that's a really key word. It's a process. It's sort of a cyclical thing of understanding the needs and desires of who your target audience is, and then trying to figure out ways that we can try to get that audience or those people interested in what you do. That applies for both companies, but also nonprofits. And then sort of, okay, how do we do that? Marketing is very, very broad in the sense of it can look like research, it can look like branding, it can look like advertising, and it can even sort of be these other like non-tangible ways of getting closer to that audience. And I really like to point this out because some people think about marketing and they think of like, okay, ads, we run these ads on Facebook or whatever, and marketing can be that, but it can also be much, much, much broader. And we're going to really try to go with the full gamut of what marketing can look like today. And then, which strategies you actually end up implementing really are going to vary based on who you are and what you're doing. And then I do want to kind of clear up one misconception, which is that marketing and sales are not the same thing. Sales is kind of that like the last step of trying to cause people to take an action. Oftentimes we think of that as being buying something, although sales isn't always necessarily buying something. But anyway, it's sort of that like closing action, whereas marketing is this long-term engagement. Like I said, it's a process, it's a cycle. Not everybody that we market to is going to end up buying something or taking this next action. So it's really about connecting with your audience. And then eventually you maybe set them up to buy, or in our case, donate or volunteer or ask for services or whatever that might be. But they are two separate things. And so we just want to make sure that we think of them as being separate. They have different roles. So with that said, what makes marketing for nonprofits actually different or unique? Everybody has a little bit of a different take on this, but I think what is at the core is that marketing for nonprofits is really about the storytelling that you're doing. You're trying to share your mission and your stories, and companies with products and things like that, they do try to do that. But I think in a nonprofit, you often have a much deeper story to tell, and it's a little bit more of this sort of mission focus. That's at the core of what you're doing, and that's going to be, of course, at the core of your marketing strategy as well. And then that links into the fact that oftentimes we're not necessarily trying to attract people that might be interested in a specific product, although sometimes that is part of nonprofit marketing. But more typically, we're looking at attracting donors, volunteers, community support, or even trying to reach people who could potentially benefit from what we're doing. So it's a little bit of a different audience oftentimes. And then finally, I would emphasize that in nonprofit marketing, we really, really, really are focused on this idea of connections and trying to find messaging that resonates with potential supporters. Oftentimes, what we're sort of giving people in return for engaging with us is different from, like, they're not getting like a physical thing, they're getting some sort of satisfaction, or so they need to feel connected with you. And so this piece of marketing takes on a much bigger importance than it might in other types of nonprofit marketing. So we're going to talk quite a bit about this connection building as we go today. Okay. So if I haven't convinced you yet, I do want to sort of highlight, why do we even need marketing? A lot of times people will come to me, or I'll tell them that I work in marketing with nonprofits, and they're like, but you're not selling anything. So like, why do you need marketing? And I hope we've gotten that question out of the way, but still, why do we need it? Why is this an important thing to be doing? Even if we don't have a lot of budget to do it, why should we do it? The first is just this idea of building awareness. This can vary a little bit depending on what your nonprofit is. Some nonprofits, like a lot of what they do has to do with awareness. Maybe they educate the community in some way and they have these resources that they need to share out. And really that depends on people knowing who you are and what you're doing. So for some nonprofits, this is like the absolute core of marketing, but for all nonprofits, it is important, because if people don't know who you are and what you're doing, then they're never going to be able to engage with you, and you'll kind of be stuck with like the same audience that you've always been working with. This happens a lot with nonprofits, especially because sort of older nonprofits have this traditional relationship with sort of an in-person community a lot of times, especially community-based nonprofits. And then sometimes, they lose out on this opportunity of finding new potential supporters, especially in this digital age. I don't hope, but I imagine some of you found this out during COVID when you were forced to take things online, that there is some potential. If you didn't see that, or maybe your nonprofit's newer than that, then this is really one way that digital can be strong. The other thing that we need to do with marketing, or why we need marketing, is to attract supporters. This really fills in or connects with the awareness part. But oftentimes, we need to work with people a little bit over time in order to convince them to take the action of supporting us. And marketing is one way that we can kind of get them closer to doing that, or have a greater proportion of people that we're interacting with do that. And we're going to talk a lot about how you can go through this process. And like I said, that's really the idea of this talk, is this idea of the journey of moving people along the process. And then, of course, most people, when they come and they're looking for help with marketing, it's because they have some sort of donation goal that they're trying to meet. A lot of times marketing campaigns end up getting sort of shaped around donations, and marketing can definitely help with donations, but it's also really important that you go through these other steps in order for your donation marketing strategy to actually be really, really strong. So you really need all three aspects to some extent in order to be able to reach the sort of what oftentimes ends up having to be, because of financial constraints, the goal of marketing, which is donations for nonprofits. So to continue, well, sometimes we need to invest in marketing. Now, I like to sort of highlight this because, marketing, it takes time, it takes effort, sometimes it takes money. And so oftentimes what happens is that in a nonprofit, maybe you have somebody that is working in marketing and communications, or that has some sort of like donor management, or they're in development, or whatever that might be, and marketing falls under their area, and they end up kind of having to explain to the rest of the team, why do we need to do marketing? Or even if it's just a one-person team, how can I justify spending my time in marketing? And so it really goes back to what I just talked about. But I think another thing that I would just highlight is that in order to grow, in order to, like I said, expand this audience, it really, really can help. And also it can help with sort of the sustainability and long-term. Again, if you don't have a lot of budget, or you don't have a lot of time to invest in it right now, even just taking these like small steps to brush up a little bit on the marketing, making sure that everything looks good, and kind of having a long-term vision, even if they're just small steps, that really is an investment in the future and kind of keeping the organization going and the momentum. So I really, really think it's important to consider that. And I'm a little biased because I love marketing, like I said, but I think that these reasons really, really, really do help the nonprofit too. So with that said, I hope you understand a little bit better the difference between marketing and sales, and also how can marketing help nonprofits, and why is it a little bit different. If you're left with any questions, like I said, please put them in the chat. But now we're going to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of this idea of the marketing funnel. And this is about this journey that I'm talking about, of getting people from not even knowing who you are to knowing who you are to engaging somehow. So this is the key, really. Okay. So I already spoke to this a little bit, but really, 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 we're talking about a funnel because I'm going to give you a visual in like 30 seconds to help you understand why I'm talking about it like a funnel. But we shouldn't think about it as exclusively being a funnel. It really is a journey. Journeys have steps back and steps forward. So while we are thinking about it in terms of like a funnel, because we're talking about like an aggregate of a lot of people that are going into our funnel, or at least hopefully a lot of people, for an individual potential supporter or community member, it really is a journey, and we're visualizing it as a funnel for sort of like the mass of the audience that we're trying to speak to. And so it really is about this idea of trying to get people from becoming aware to becoming active. And we have some key stages. Different sort of marketing philosophies will look at this a little bit differently. Maybe you've heard of like a flywheel or journeys and things like this. But we're talking about it like a funnel, and we'll talk about some specific stages that might sound familiar. And basically, if you're able to target different steps of the funnel, then the idea is that you're able to sort of nurture this relationship and increase the number of people that move down it. So with that said, we can go ahead and actually take a look at what am I talking about here. We break our funnel down into sort of these five-ish main points. On the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about each one, but here you can see this idea of the funnel. So if you look at this sort of like bright pink one at the top, this is brand building. So this is even more of like an internal thing where we're trying to build up all of our assets out there. We're trying to sort of get our story together and understand what is it that we're trying to say. It's being consistent across our many different platforms. So that way we can go to the second step, which is this awareness. So before people even hear about us, there is like maybe some sort of general brand out there, like a vibe. And then people become aware of who we are and what we're doing. And this is where sort of the messaging that you're putting out there comes into play. And then, of course, people, as they hear more about you, they consider, they evaluate, and then they take action. We split this into 5 sort of stages because this really helps from a strategic perspective to understand what we need to do at each step of the funnel. But like I said, this is a journey. They might go through a little bit, then they might go back and they might kind of skip a step. And then, it's not just totally linear, but the idea is that more people that are aware of what you are, some percentage of them are going to finally convert. And our goal is to try to encourage the largest number of people to do so, while of course taking into consideration that we don't just want to like dump 10 million people in the top, because that's not, they might not actually be interested in what we do. So our goal is to find the people that would be interested in that, would potentially benefit from or connect with what we're doing, and then try to move them down, because it's useless to just reach out to a whole bunch of people that aren't actually interested in or wouldn't be interested in what we're doing. That's a waste of time and effort on your part. Instead, we want to do this strategically so we can find people that, when they see what we're doing, they're like, oh yeah, how did I not know about that? And then encourage them to move down. So that is kind of linked to this common misconception of, no, they're just trying to feed me things. And the idea is that we're trying to just put the information out there in the right time, in the right place for people that would connect with it. So I will now tell you a little bit more about each one. I already really talked about that first one, about the strong identity. This is, again, like this really internal reflection at the brand building stage. It's sort of going back to our mission, thinking about what we want to put out there publicly, what do we think might connect. This is where this sort of research also might happen, where you might speak with people. One thing that can be really helpful is to find out maybe where have people historically heard about who you are, so you can find out maybe where is your branding a little bit weaker and where has it historically been resonating with people if you're already doing some marketing, or even if you're not, sort of like just the type of messaging that resonates. That can be really helpful. And then we actually want to start taking the actions to increase our awareness. We'll talk about some of the channels very shortly that match up with that, but this is sort of the first contact, like at least conscious contact, that people will have with you. Then there's this idea of consideration and evaluation and intent. I think that these 2 stages are often the most sort of confusing, or where people get lost a little bit. Consideration is this where we're trying to sort of put ourselves into people's sort of menu of options when they're starting to think about doing something. They're not actively like trying to select between things, but we're like it's this middle stage between when they're just aware of who we are, and then they become sort of like actively aware that we offer things to do. So it's a subtle difference. But this is really where this sort of like content comes into play. It's not as maybe pushy or really like putting the idea into people's minds. It's just being out there and really showing that we know what we're talking about and we know what we're doing, and these things that we're doing are having an impact, and those sorts of stories happen in the consideration phase. And then the evaluation content and intent is when people are actually like looking to take an action. This can actually be a very, very short phase, because oftentimes, especially in the digital era, people make decisions very quickly. But that's why we need this whole rest of the funnel beforehand, because it relies a little bit on this sort of like unconscious thought. So people have already been going through some sort of evaluation process or really consideration process ahead. But then at the time when they're ready to make the decision, we need to have our option be very clear. And then finally, people are going to convert. I'll give you an example of what this actually looks like a little bit further on. But what I would really highlight here is that when you're thinking about this funnel, you should actually probably try to divide it into multiple funnels. Many nonprofits that work with communities and individuals have to divide this up into at least two different funnels, where you have one funnel that is for people that somehow need your services or need what you're doing. Oftentimes nonprofits don't really want to put a whole lot more people into the top of this funnel because they already have so many people that need their help, that are aware of them and have connected with them, but that they can't actually help because of some sort of limitation in terms of, again, resources. Um, Unfortunately, that's the case. If that's not the case, then you can use this to reach more potential people that need your help as well. But even if you're at the point where like you're like, we have more people than we can even serve, you can still use this funnel to consider how are people finding out about you and ensuring that the people that do come to you, what they like are looking for actually aligns with what you offer. And this can help you be a little bit more efficient about what you're doing. So that way, if you somehow are unable to help people, you don't want to sort of get their hopes up or overwhelm your team with all of these people who are requesting things. And at the same time, you can empower people that would potentially be able to engage with you with having more information and more resources and making everything that you offer easier to access. So all of those types of considerations, they have to do with sort of this public facing side of the organization, and all of that does fit into marketing. So that's kind of one side of what the funnel could look like. And then a totally separate pipeline, but that at the same time has to like cross over with all of this messaging because it's all public, is this supporter sort of funnel idea. And that for different nonprofits is going to look different. Some nonprofits have like corporate sponsors and that's how they fund things. So they need a funnel that's focused on them. Whereas other people get a lot of support from individual donors, while others get support from grants. And so maybe they need to like appeal to grant funding organizations and then any different number of things. Some nonprofits just need volunteers. They actually don't need any more funds, but they need help with people to execute things. So all of that to say, whatever it might be, you should have sort of a different funnel for different people, but at the same time, remember that they do need to overlap. So I suggest sort of initially doing the brainstorming separately and then considering how can these two things end up blending together in a way that they don't contradict each other. Okay, that was a lot. So what does this actually look like in context? This is the way that I often organize a funnel. You might not have all of these different channels, and we'll talk a little bit more. Yes, I'm okay on time in terms of the different channels as we go along. But in general, the way that you can think about it is that these different channels that are more organic and that are, like I said, more storytelling based often kind of happen at the top. They're usually very visual and you're just trying to get the content out there. So that could be SEO and blogs and content marketing, or it could be organic social media. And again, speaking to some of these like non-digital strategies, things like events and getting out there, personal connections even can happen in this sort of awareness stage. And I do like to emphasize that a little bit because a lot of nonprofits tell me, well, most people are just like, friends of community members or whatever that might be. And even if that's the case, they still need to engage with you oftentimes in some way outside of the like person to person realm. And so building these like traditional methods into a digital strategy can also be really helpful and maybe even reflects better reality for many nonprofits. And then if you have the ability to run any kind of paid advertising, this often is a middle of the funnel strategy. If you have no marketing budget, you can still do some paid advertising using the Google Ad Grant. If you don't know anything about the Google Ad Grant, that is a webinar in and of itself, which I have given before. So I would suggest that you take a look at our website, and we have got some videos on YouTube and all kinds of things to help you get started with the Google Grant. But just a really short note about it is that it's $10,000 in advertising credit on Google search ads. So If you didn't know what any of that means, unfortunately, I do not have time to go into it today, but there are resources out there that can help you with that. And that would be sort of this middle funnel strategy. And we'll talk a little tiny bit about that more too as we go along here in one of our examples. And then the last step is often, especially for nonprofits, but for many, many different industries, email marketing. And it breaks my heart when nonprofits tell me that they're not doing any kind of email marketing, because this really is the way. It's often free or very, very, very inexpensive if you have just like maybe $50 a month to invest in marketing. This is where I would put it, because you can get emails in a lot of different ways. Make sure that you're being compliant with like all of the different norms based on where you are. When you add people to your email list, please don't just like put people on there without getting any kind of consent. But there are many ways to go about this. And when you do have people on your email list, then you can tell them all these stories and you have a direct contact with them. And that is so important, because you can even kind of build a whole strategy around email marketing. So this is our marketing funnel that we tend to think of. It's going to have some adjustments based on what you're able to do. And you know, there's different arguments for why actually paid advertising should be further up or further down or whatever that might be. But generally, it's going to look something like this. Okay. So again, we talked a little bit about this. I'm going to go a little bit more into depth here about moving people along the funnel. So I spoke to this already, but really I would emphasize that you need to think about different ways at each step. So how do you get people from one step to the next step? And sometimes that might be like a really specific way you do it, whereas on your website, maybe you've got this beautiful blog content that acts as sort of maybe an awareness or even a consideration type content. And then you have a pop-up that asks people to sign up for your email newsletter, and then you get them into the email, and that's putting them into the valuation intent, for example. So sometimes it can be really specific actions. Sometimes it can be a little bit more subtle. For example, this awareness to consideration oftentimes happens just by kind of appearing in people's feeds on social media more often, even if that's just organically. Having really powerful stories that get people's attention, that is a way to go from awareness to consideration. So it can be very explicit, but it doesn't have to be. And then at the conversion stage, I would encourage you to not be shy about using clear calls to action. Sometimes people are a little bit, they don't really want to ask or make an ask so directly. And you know your audience best. So if that doesn't seem like it fits with your audience, then I, of course, respect that. But I would encourage you to at least play around with this idea, because people know that you're marketing to them. You know, they sign up for your email, they're expecting to get some kind of marketing. And so making the right ask at the right time in the right context after having fulfilled expectations can actually be really powerful, and it's something that is definitely worth doing. And so when you know that you've done all of the work ahead of time to give people useful information and you feel confident that they're the right audience, then you can make direct calls to action. And that's absolutely an okay thing to do. And then to continue with this, another way that we think about sort of guiding people through the funnel is just this idea of that it's a long-term relationship and that you're trying to build a relationship. So things like being personalized in your communications, you know, saying hi and then somebody's name in your emails. It sounds like a small thing. It's not that hard to do, but really people do feel a better connection when you do that. And also trying to get feedback in any way if you can. So if people leave comments on organic social, then you can take that as feedback and you try to put more content out that, for example, aligns with that. And just having this idea of engagement, this is a really, again, kind of low budget way to build these connections. This long-term relationship thing is not about investment of money. It can be about investment of time, but it really is worth it, especially if you're able to take that long-term view. And again, I think that's maybe a little bit of a mistake that sometimes people make in marketing, is thinking that like we need to just get people to do things now and they need to donate today. But oftentimes it really does come through this idea of this long-term relationship and people feel connected. So it's worth it if you're able to. Okay. Orty, are there any questions or anything that we should bring up? We're about halfway through, so.
No questions up to now.
Okay, great. Well, then we can go ahead and get into some more of the nitty-gritty of the channels. Okay. Well, I teased a little bit at these before, but now we can talk a little bit more specifically about them. Um, the first that I want to talk about, and these sort of everything that's on this slide here is related to the website typically, but your website is like your nonprofit's, we call it here digital hub, but really it's like the bread and butter of your marketing because basically everything that you're going to do online, and again, we're talking in terms of digital, but everything is going to lead back to this. So if your website's not in good shape, it's not going to work. Sort of all the other things, you're going to lose people at the bottom of the funnel. So that's not to scare you if, you can always improve it and it's not like, oh no, it's, as long as it's functioning, you're going to be able to make it useful enough, at least to fit into the rest of this. But I would really encourage you to spend time with your website, understand, is it user friendly? Is it optimized? And does it speak to who we are? Do people resonate with it? You can even like do like informal surveys, ask some of your volunteers, hey, like, what do you think about our website? Especially I find like I'm not so into using websites on my phone. I really prefer to use things on my computer, but a lot of maybe younger people are very much using everything on their phones. So asking somebody like, hey, what do you think about this? Like, what does it look like? That can be like a really good way to get feedback from somebody who's not in the trenches in the website every single day. Another thing that you can do is use analytics. There are many, many, many free analytics tools out there, and you will absolutely be surprised by what you find. This is really fun for me, actually, when I start working with a new nonprofit and we dive into their analytics and they see that pages that they thought were, maybe not that important or that they hadn't really thought about in a long time on their website, often actually a lot of times get a lot of visits to them, and maybe they weren't the most optimized, maybe they're out of date, maybe they didn't really reflect what was going on with the organization today. And that's such a shame because if you're getting all these people there, then you want to be able to do all these other actions to try to engage them. And so using some of these analytics tools is a really, really, really key way, again, for no charge, to be able to get more insights. So I would encourage you to do that. And linked into that is this idea of SEO. SEO is like, I don't know, two peas in a pod with the website. SEO is built into the website, and it's also sort of how people often find your website. So again, this thing that I mentioned of people not really knowing how people get to the website, well, this has a lot oftentimes to do with SEO. And sometimes you have this SEO success that you didn't know about. In case you're not aware of what SEO is, because it's kind of like a buzzword term, it's search engine optimization. It has to do with how your website is optimized and also your content in order to make it easier for Google or other search engines to find an index. A really sort of growing aspect of SEO is AI and the idea of these like AI searches. Um, it's maybe not the most important part of SEO today. Most searches are still happening in Google and they're still kind of like normal searches, but it's coming. And so brushing up on the SEO basics today is also going to help you when we have to make some changes to SEO in the future to prepare for all this AI stuff. And there are already some ways that you can configure some of your SEO things in the backside of your website to make it a little bit better for that. So it's worth getting into this now because it's probably only going to get more complex, unfortunately. So I really encourage you to think about that. And then again, also very related is this idea of content marketing. I, for a long time, had a really like quite a bit of trouble with this because I didn't really think about content as being marketing. I kind of thought about it as something else. Maybe it was like our annual report, and I was thinking about it as being for donors and for funders. And I was maybe thinking about these blog posts as we do as like speaking to, maybe some people that already knew that just were trying to keep up with what we were doing. And then I don't know, some of our website content, I was just kind of thinking about it as just being there. So I wasn't really putting it into this context of marketing. And this is so, 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 so important. For nonprofits, content marketing is like the number one kind of marketing that you're probably already doing and not even realizing that you're doing it if you don't think you're doing marketing actively. You're putting content out into the world probably if you have a website or if you have social media. And so one thing that you can do today is just take a step back and look at how does all of this content fit into sort of the wider purpose of what we're trying to do in marketing. Good content, high quality content, useful content can really help your SEO, so it can make your website more discoverable. And it's also very, very important for building this kind of connection with your potential supporters. A lot of times people ask me, what should I do in terms of content? I don't know what to say. What should we say? We don't have anybody that's writing, all of these sort of issues. There's a lot of potential advice there. One thing that you can always do is go back to some of the content that you've already created and try to sort of fix it up so it's more relevant, more useful today. Really popular content for nonprofits has often to do with sort of impact stories, talking about the impact that you've made either on communities or if maybe you help animals or the environment, sort of talking a little bit more about what you're doing and accompanying that with photos and videos, especially videos. So important. It really illustrates what you do. And this sort of like multimedia format is going to be better in terms of these algorithms that are going around looking for content. And again, it's just oftentimes more impactful. If you really, really don't even know where to start, what I would encourage you to do is go look at what other nonprofits are doing. If there's other nonprofits in your industry that you can look at, even big ones, that's great. If you're like not really sure even who's in your industry, even just looking at things that are not necessarily so related to what you do, but in the same realm, you can still get an idea of what is the type of content that's out there. It's going to be a little bit different though, depending on who you are. But what I would also encourage you to do is to try to not think about it as just being limited to the website, but you're going to save yourself some time and some effort if you already from the minute you're starting to like conceive of what the content would be, think about the different channels that you can put it out on. Yes, it's going to go onto your website. It's probably going to go onto your social media, but how can we also build it into, for example, your Google Grant strategy? With that perfect segue, I'll talk about Google Grant. Google Grant, I already mentioned, but I'll say it again. It's this $10,000 credit in Google search ads on the Google search network. And what these ads do are like if somebody Googles something, these keywords that they type into Google, you have ads that show in the search results based on those keywords. Why is content related to that? Well, content helps you sort of broaden the types of keywords that you can use for the Google Grant. And it also helps you be able to use Google Grant, not just in sort of those more bottom of the funnel, like somebody's searching for what nonprofit should I donate to, which unfortunately there's not a lot of people searching for that. So we need to go a little bit higher in the funnel. So having these like impactful stories, especially like if you've got some sort of statistics that you could share or some sort of infographic that talks about what you do, these types of things, if you can like connect them with this sort of wider, maybe more broadly appealing content, can be really helpful. One type of content that I see do really well in the Google Grant for most people is some sort of article or page that speaks to what is the problem that your nonprofit's trying to address. People are really, really interested in sort of problems and things that are going on, and they often are, the issues are what get attention in the news. So you can sort of go viral on accident oftentimes when you have this content. I'll give you an example. I worked with a nonprofit that did things related to like identity theft, and they had this article that talked a lot about like one particular type of identity theft that they had some resources to be able to help with and to try to educate people about. And then a big news story went out about this particular kind of identity theft, and they all of a sudden saw a lot of traffic to their website. So if they hadn't already had this content out there, then they wouldn't have been able to sort of connect with all these people that were interested in what they were doing. And then the rest of the funnel came in handy because they had these sort of two different journeys already thought out about how some people maybe just needed help and that it would be best to try to connect them with materials. And other people would see the super importance of this issue that they were trying to address and then try to funnel them more toward the supporter and engagement. So this is one way that sort of that content can serve at the top of the funnel, but then you move people down the funnel. Okay. I could keep going, but for the sake of time, I'm going to continue. The other channels that I will mention today, although keep in mind there's many more channels, is social media. Everybody's a little bit scared of social media. I'm a little bit scared of social media. It's a big monster sometimes. There's so many different platforms. There's so many different things you can do. It's changing all of the time. There's different channels. We didn't even write in here TikTok because TikTok is scary. But we can't just be scared of it. We actually have to interact with it. So if you also think social media is scary, what I would encourage you to do is to just pick one or two channels or one or two types of stories that you want to tell and just focus in first. Test the waters. Don't try to do everything all at once because you're going to be overwhelmed. It's going to take too much time. You're going to just get lost in it and then it's not going to be worth it. And so what I would encourage you to do is take a look at the different channels, try to like leave behind any preconceived notions that you have and really try to evaluate each one in terms of who your audience is, who you're trying to engage with. It might not necessarily always be exactly who you think it might be, depending on what are your potential, or what are your marketing funnels that you're working with? Who are these audiences that you're trying to reach? If you are one of those people, for example, that need these more like corporate sponsors or more of a B2B approach, then of course LinkedIn might be the right fit, even if the actual mission that you're trying to further, it doesn't seem so corporate or anything like that. So that's an example of how it might not align. Again, maybe you might have some sort of like youth advocacy program or something like that, but you realize that many of your supporters are a little bit older. So having a presence on Facebook, even if you're like the people that benefit from your services aren't necessarily on Facebook, but your supporters are, then maybe you need to go to Facebook. So don't just think about what's trendy. TikTok may or may not be right for you. That's a question I get almost every single day is, should we be doing TikTok? Maybe, depends on your audience. And also think about what you're able to invest in it. What kind of content do you have? What kind of content can you recycle? Are you very visual? Are you maybe not so visual? If you're not so visual, then maybe X is actually a better fit because you can use more words and that's okay on that channel. So really try to think about where you fit best. And then once you do select a channel, try to commit to it. Try to post as regularly as you can. That doesn't mean every single day. Please don't post every single day, 3 times a day. That's not going to help anybody. You're going to go crazy and it's not worth it. But do try to post often, once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, depending on what's normal on the channel that you're working with. But don't just post for the sake of posting. Really do try to make sure that you're furthering the information because a lot of these algorithms work based on if people are interacting with what you're doing. So if it's not resonating, then it's maybe not worth putting out there. And I could keep going, but I think I'll leave it there. Just don't try to do everything all at once. Try to focus in on what you're able to do and what would fit best with the audience that you're trying to reach. Then we have email marketing. I spoke about this quite a bit already, but I'll just talk a little bit here about what are the types of things that you can do with email marketing. Most people think of newsletters, and I do think newsletters are good. This is a little bit not total. Some people think newsletters are better or worse. I think that they could be really valuable, especially again, if you already have put together some content for some of your other channels, it's another way to keep on the mind of your supporters. For example, I get the Habitat for Humanity newsletter from where my parents live because one time I went to a build with them and, you know, I might not be actively volunteering with them all the time, but just sort of seeing the progress of the build that I participated in as it's gone and it's, you know, continued its journey is really interesting to me. So even if I'm maybe not the primary audience for some of the supporter-based things, you know, that still keeps me engaged and I may eventually kind of turn back into a supporter. So I think newsletters is good again for this long-term relationship building. You can also share sort of these updates. And then if you have a variety of newsletter content, then it also makes it a little bit, or just general email content, makes it easier to make these kinds of appeals when the time comes for fundraising, for example. I would also encourage you to go beyond the basic newsletter and consider doing a short email marketing sequence. So for example, if you have a newsletter, somebody signs up for it, try making just a personalized, hey, thanks for signing up for our email sort of message that can go out. Almost every single email provider allows you to automate this. You don't have to be like checking up on it all the time. But this is one of these examples of little tiny ways to make things a little bit more personalized, show some more value. And it also, again, it's just one time you set it up and it's going to run on its own. So if you have those 10 minutes to set it up, that's just one more drop in the bucket toward trying to make things more personal and build these long-term relationships. Then webinars and virtual events, you can probably tell that we like webinars. I think it's a really, really good way to engage and understand where people are at. And this is a really interesting way that you can add value to the people that you're trying to reach. So you can show off a little bit about what you're doing, but you can also have these ways to sort of engage and show how you can be a leader in your community. If you're not really feeling the webinar vibe, then you can also look at virtual events. These got very popular during COVID and they've dropped off a little bit, but you would be surprised that these continue to be quite important. One nonprofit that I was working with recently was hosting a conference and they weren't really planning on doing some sort of like virtual attendee thing. And they got a lot of requests to actually have some sort of virtual component and they ended up adding it and they got a ton of more people involved that way. So I wouldn't underestimate the power that a potential virtual event could have. And it's going to help you, even if you don't see like an immediate like jump in donors or something like that. It's again, just one more way to have this sort of long-term audience that you're trying to engage with over time. So don't underestimate those. And then of course, if you do in-person events, you should also try to connect people back into this digital ecosystem by asking them for their email at some point if they register for the event online or things like that. Okay, how am I doing on time here? We're almost out of time and I want to make sure I get to these strategies and give a little bit of time for the Q&A. So I will just say a few words here on 2, 3 topics. The first is storytelling. If you're in sort of the nonprofit communications world, you've probably heard about storytelling a million different times. There's courses that you can do about it, TED Talks galore. So I'm not going to go too much into depth. But there's a reason why we talk about storytelling so much. And it's really trying to just think about how you can create this kind of cohesive narrative across all these different platforms that you have. You're going to tell slightly different stories to your different audiences, but you also want to try to find a way to really reflect who you are in the stories that you're telling. And so really, 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 we have this advantage versus other sort of marketing industries and nonprofits that we often have really, really emotional, engaging, impactful stories. And what your job to do in marketing is to just get them out there and make sure, of course, that they're coherent and cohesive. And they can really help engage those people that are most important. I'll leave it at that because there's so much to say there that I would encourage you to learn more about it. But then the other thing that I would emphasize is this idea of multi-channel campaigns. I already gave several examples. If you didn't notice, I'll kind of put it into words here. But basically, you can't expect people to sort of take the jump from not hearing about you or kind of just vaguely knowing who you are to engaging in some way without this multi-channel approach. In paid advertising, we say that people need to engage with your ads at least 3 times before we're going to see them take action. So I think we can kind of also broaden this to different channels by sort of casting your net wide to potentially interested people and then finding all these different places to connect with them. That's really how we're going to see the most impact. And this is the key to moving people down this funnel that I've been talking so much about. Okay, so I'll give one example that I think is really relevant because we're coming up on November and Giving Tuesday is getting close. So if I had to sort of give this idea of the storytelling and multi-channel campaigns into an example, the way that we can think about this is starting with a landing page. Remember how I said the website was so important? Well, have landing pages. I would really encourage you that if you're able to, if you have management of your website, try to make landing pages that are specific to your campaign so you can have the most relevant information. Again, we want to try to avoid wasting people's time. We want to give them the right information in a very clear way. And here you can also sort of have these different elements happening on the website that appeal to different audiences. You for example, might consider also having like a pop-up or something like that to try to engage people further down the line so you don't lose them at this stage of just getting them to the website. You should probably also, in this sort of hypothetical Giving Tuesday campaign, want to do some storytelling. One of the things that's kind of fun about these campaigns is that everybody knows like the Giving Tuesday is like the day, right? So you can kind of play around with the timing and plan this out. So, maybe on the day, over the course of the day, you have like a couple different stories that you share on your Instagram story about benefits that people have seen from these donations that have been made. And over the course of the day, you can even kind of like build up to making that ask that I've mentioned. So play around with that sort of thing. There's a lot of options out there on social media, and it's a way to, again, kind of build this narrative over time and not just like hit people with like, please donate to my nonprofit, because unfortunately, there's a lot of different nonprofits that, need help. And so we want to try to connect with people that really would like want to engage with what we're doing. I think we have, yes, two more sort of sub examples as part of this hypothetical campaign. Don't underestimate hashtags. When I first started working in social media marketing, I was like, oh, hashtags are done. Hashtags are not done. Hashtags are so really important. They actually help with your SEO as well. So don't underestimate them. I think it's worth trying it out and seeing if it helps. And then email marketing here in this hypothetical campaign. This is an example of what I was saying about using sequences. So for example, maybe you have an email to remind people before it's fall, we're thinking about sort of this, like, we're in this giving mood, we're thinking about what we're grateful for. Like when people are already kind of in that mode, you can get on their minds and give them something to talk about, share useful or interesting information. Then on Giving Tuesday itself, that is your chance to show off those stories. And then if people donate to them, don't just go silent. Like the number one way to help with recurring donors is to thank donors. You probably already do this, but you can make that even more impactful when you like share specifics about, what were you able to do or what are you planning to do, and really try to celebrate how they've contributed to. Probably you're thinking about that already, but think about how you could do that through marketing specifically. Okay. So I want to tell you a little bit more about one example, and then I think we are about to go into a few minutes for questions. So I worked with this nonprofit called Amazon Frontlines, and I want to talk a little bit about this Google grant thing because, again, if you don't have marketing budget, this is like one way that you can really play with a new channel that maybe we wouldn't otherwise be able to, and that's paid advertising. So in this example, we really, really try to focus on this idea of raising the visibility of the website and then helping them sort of brainstorm out the way that their different like other channels could support this influx of all these people going to the website. So basically they had a Google grant campaign that like showcased all these stories that they had to tell. So going back to that content marketing, that storytelling. And then once they got people onto the website, they had a really, really clear way to sign up for these email newsletters. And then over time, because of this larger number of people that had the right interests going into the top of the funnel, they actually saw an increase in donations at the bottom of the funnel. So it's this full journey of, it's not any one specific channel can do it all on its own, but this idea of, okay, we got to move people sort of through this funnel to get to the bottom of it. So with that brief example, if you want to read more about it, we do also have a little bit more information about the specifics on our website, so you can find that. And I think that brings us into questions. Are there any questions? Okay. Looks like most of the questions have been answered in the chat. So, yeah, we talked about Google Analytics. We talked about, oh, thank you, Margot. Okay. Well, we will follow up via email, and there will be a little perk in there, surprise, for, coming, engaging with us. So keep an eye on your email and you might get a little gift in there. And yeah, thank you for coming. I hope this was useful. I hope you've gotten some ideas to really think a little bit more about, how can you fit all your marketing ideas into the marketing funnel. And All right, we'll see you in the next edition of Elevation webinars then. Thanks, everybody.